Welcome to the Financial Fun Podcast with your host, Tammy Johnston. This is where Tammy talks with business owner parents and grandparents about the interesting and important subject of money. We promise this to be an interesting and open discussion, as that's how we learn best. And now, here's your host, author of the Financial Foundations. Financial Foundations is a series of books to teach kids about money, goal setting, and living a balanced life. Find out more at financialfun.ca. Here's Tammy Johnston.
First things first, I would like to thank all of my listeners that have subscribed and reviewed my podcast and invite you to subscribe and review if you haven't yet. I appreciate you helping us to get the word out and making financial literacy a safe and welcoming subject for kids and adults. Second, please check out my podcast website, financialfun.ca, where you will be able to access past shows, find out more about me and our guests, as well as purchase the beautifully illustrated Financial Foundations books that teach kids about money in a fun, healthy, and holistic way. Hello once again, and thank you for joining us for the Financial Fun Podcast. Today our guest is a good friend and client of mine, Mr. John Breeze. Thank you for joining us, John.
It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, John, tell us a bit about what you do.
What do I do? Oh, what's an interesting question. What do I do? My primary function is as a business coach and as a leadership coach. And my secondary interest, which is completely different, is I love editing and designing books.
Well, that definitely keeps you busy. So when you're talking about like a business and a leadership coach, what does that mean?
Well, as a business coach, I help business owners get clear on what their business is all about, what direction it's heading, why isn't it as profitable as it should be, and why are they spending far too much time working in the business instead of doing the other things that they would prefer to be doing, like, heaven forbid, being at home, spending time with the family, traveling, hobbies, sports, you name it, not to mention sleeping.
Yeah, very, very important stuff, especially for those starting off where you just seem to eat, think, sleep, breathe, everything is all about the business.
Absolutely, yeah. And the leadership work that I do is kind of heading in the direction of working with leaders and owners and partners who are working in collaboration with another person. So it's what we call partnership coaching, but it's not about marriage or romantic relationships or anything like that. It's about people who are working together to a common purpose. And yes, there's a significant element of building and maintaining relationship and common humanity and care and concern for the other person, but it's very much purposeful. Examples are, we just had a client recently join us who has been tasked with a colleague on an equal basis to set up a brand new department in a company, in an organization, and to create a community in that department that is quite different from the rest of the organization and is focused on recognition and acceptance of each other as humans with issues as opposed to cogs in a wheel. So that's an interestingly developing business that we're noticing. A number of companies are starting to do this kind of thing and recognize that two people working together brings so much more into the partnership and into the creativity than one person working by themselves and or directing subordinates.
Oh, completely. Like businesses are starting to realize the importance of treating their people like people so that they can give their best rather than just putting in their time to get paid.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what is your family situation, John?
Family situation, I'm married, second time through. I have a daughter from first marriage who lives in Ottawa. She and her husband have two children, my grandchildren. They are both teenagers, so it's an interesting time for all of them. And we probably get to spend time with them, quite honestly, about once a year, although we do spend time on the phone and that sort of thing. But it's a version of a long-distance family relationship rather than just around the corner. I've had enough of you today. Go visit Grandpa.
Yeah, which is becoming more and more common. It's more normal to have family that No, you can't just send them around the corner or anything. It's a different city or a different province.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much a sign of our, and not that there's anything wrong with this, but to me, it's a sign of our increasing mobility and our increasing willingness to choose to go live in places that have meaning for us as future opportunity rather than past historical traditional ties.
And what are some of the things that being a grandfather, what are some of the things that you were noticing that are very different about with kids and money when you were growing up versus like your grandchildren now? Not only just a different generation, but a different country, because you were originally from England, aren't you?
Yes, I grew up in England. I came to Canada when just after I graduated. So, yeah, very interestingly, differently formative time. Funny you should ask that question about what's different. So here's something that I find is fundamentally different that came up for me just the other day. My grandson, I know, has an iPhone, which is fine. I did a bit of thinking back to when I had my very first job. I think I was about 15 years old, and I got a summer job working in a local sort of manufacturing packaging plant that packaged powdered soup into aluminum foil packages. And I calculated that on the basis of the wage that I was earning then, and it was not unreasonable for a student, it would have taken me a year and a half to earn enough money without spending any to buy an iPhone.
If the wages were the same as what you were making then, and the iPhone is what it costs now.
Yes, exactly. And interestingly enough, he's about the same age as I was at that particular time, but he didn't have any I should mention that he bought the iPhone himself. It wasn't a gift.
Oh, well, that's very impressive.
Yeah, there's an interesting difference that sort of came to me recently. What else was different? Well, certainly at the time that I was growing up, which was a little bit after the Second World War, it was definitely a time of scarcity. We had rationing of sort of basic commodities and clothing and that kind of thing. So money had a slightly different meaning, I suppose, at that time, even though I was very young in terms of understanding it. But there were limited things you could do with it, for starters, because you had limited access to a lot of the basic things that we take so much for granted now, butter and sugar and bacon and eggs and things.
When you say rationing, because like I've always heard about that and like a few things from my grandparents and stuff, but what exactly did that mean? Like, how did it affect your life day to day? Like, when you say rationing, what did that mean?
Well, each person had a booklet full of coupons. And these coupons were for specific items, and they had dates on them. So the idea was, if you, just as an example, you went down to the grocery store, and if you wanted a pound of sugar, you traded a coupon for, let's assume it was £1. It might have been half a pound, but who cares? And if there were more than one person in the family, then you could trade 2 coupons and get 2 of them. And that was it. You couldn't get any more until the following week. Same thing with eggs, same thing with butter, same things with a number of staple food items like that. And part of the issue was to do with avoiding hoarding, to stretch the supplies and avoid too much, at least, of an underground market of commodities like that would have pushed the prices out of sight. It was true also for cloth and clothing. Those were the days when I would have said most, and I'm afraid it was true that it would be most mothers made clothes for themselves and their children, and on the same basis, they would have a set of coupons that allowed them to buy so many yards of cloth every month or whatever it might be. And when it was used, and there just wasn't any reasonable way to get any more until the next ration arrived. So it was a controlled distribution of critical items that were not available at any level of abundance. And so that was perhaps more of the driving issue than actually just, do we have enough money to buy things? It was, do we have enough coupons available that they would be allowed to sell them to us? Interesting contrast with today, I guess.
Oh, it's a complete opposite. Like, like I said, I've heard about it, but I never really, like, I'm going, how exactly does that work? Because, like, you want to talk about clothes now. I was just talking with another person, and, like, the thing with the fast fashion, and you go out to the stores, and they have so much cheap, poorly made clothing coming out literally every single week that it's, like, thrift stores can't even take it anymore, and most of this stuff is just going straight to the landfill. And then hearing about, you're going, well, you only get so much material, and yes, the mom was typically the one doing the sewing. Like, night and day difference.
Oh, for sure. Yes, definitely an atmosphere of scarcity rather than an atmosphere of abundance. That's true. And then you might almost say, and this is, I know, a generational attitude. You might almost say, there's now an attitude of excess. Oh. And one thing I notice, well, two things that immediately come to mind. One is the prevalence of thrift stores that are overloaded with things that people are getting rid of, and it's noticeable everything that shows up in the thrift stores is in pretty good usable condition. It's not like people are throwing away junk; they're just getting rid of stuff that they don't want anymore. And also the proliferation of storage companies who rent lockers to. So instead of getting rid of stuff, you can just put it into storage and keep it and keep it and keep it for as long as you care to pay the fee.
Yeah, some people that are of the belief that he who dies with the most toys wins, but they forget you can't take it with you, and other people have to deal with that when you're gone.
Yes, who knows where the key of the padlock is?
Or I've got a good friend and client, and her brother owns a Got Junk franchise out on Vancouver Island. And she says that a large part of his business, in fact, the majority of his business is dealing with people where mom or dad, like grandma or grandpa, have finally passed on, and they have these entire houses filled with stuff. Not just like, yes, he deals with a few hoarders, but there's just like decades worth of accumulations of everything, and the family doesn't have the time, the space, the desire to deal with anything, so they phone up his company and say, take everything, just empty the place.
I love the way you call that a junk franchise.
Well, it's called, his franchise is called Got Junk, because they come in, like if you're doing construction or your yard cleanup and stuff, so they come and get garbage in large quantities. Or if you're doing, like I said, renovations and things like that. But large part of his business is just dealing with the states. The family doesn't have the time, interest, motivation, none of it. Just take it all.
Amazing. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a huge contrast when you sort of make me aware of it from my childhood until where we are now. And I'm just observing it. I'm not feeling in any way, critical of it, but it's interesting that you draw my attention to that significant difference. And I don't think it really changed until I don't think it changed very significantly until I actually went away to university. So that period of my time was automatically very much aware of the things that were not available and couldn't do, by contrast with today, where it's all about there's so much that's available and can do that choosing what not to do now becomes a driving factor rather than what might be possible.
We've been talking about like when you were a kid and like having to deal with the rationing and stuff like that. And then when you moved to Canada and you started your own family and dealing with your daughter and stuff like that, what were some of the things that you noticed were different from that? Like, yes, we have very much different with dealing what your grandchildren are dealing with, but what were some of the things that you noticed that were different dealing with your own daughter when she was small?
Well, one thing that I remember, as you get me thinking about it, even though we were certainly not in what I would call abundant circumstances when we arrived in Canada, I was newly married at the time, we didn't really have to stop and think about whether or not, certainly what we felt was essential and necessary from the point of view of being parents and providing safe and comfortable and nutritious and healthy surroundings for our daughter. There was no question about whether or not we could afford it or whether or not what we felt we needed was going to be available. It would just, I suppose we very quickly fell into the place of taking it for granted. I mean, healthcare was available, nutritious food was available in reasonable abundance, comfortable, safe, warm housing, choice of baby clothes and that sort of thing. One thing I do remember that was kind of curious at the time when we arrived, we thought we would just go down the road to, I guess it was Eaton's in the day, and get some furniture for our new apartment. And that was when we discovered that we could order whatever we wanted, but it would take 2 weeks because it had to be delivered from Toronto. We were living in Montreal at the time. This was something that was a little surprising, that, yes, if you wanted furniture, it wasn't that it wasn't affordable. You just had to plan to be able to actually get it into your home. We ended up going around the corner and buying 2 bar stools and a coffee table, which got us through at least the first couple of weeks until Eaton showed up with the stuff that we'd ordered. That was kind of fun.
So you're saying, like, if you've been back in England, it would have just been, like, delivered right away?
When you ask that question, I have to say I don't know, because I didn't do it. I mean, the furniture that we had in the home had more or less been there forever, and there were some new items from time to time, and I was not aware of how that actually came to be. Yes, stuff must have been delivered. But I wasn't conscious of what was the process that my parents went through to actually make that happen. Oh, what a sheltered life I must have led if I didn't even know where a bed came from.
That's the big thing. All the stuff that you don't even think about because it's just background and it's taken care of until you actually have to start dealing with it.
Well, I mean, yes, again, piece of taken for granted. If I want to buy a bed, I have the choice of driving down to IKEA, buying a couple of cardboard boxes full of stuff, bringing them home and creating a bed. I get to choose to do that. That's perhaps another of the really significant changes that's happened over that period of time, is access to that kind of large mass production of items that used to be more or less custom made for the need. Certainly in the 1920s, 1930s, when my parents were growing up, that was probably the case. You wanted a bed, you ordered one, and somebody made one for you. Nowadays, you want a bed, you go get one, stick it in the back of the car, and take it home. Mattresses are a bit more of a problem, but the bed itself, at least, is easy.
Hey, a lot of the places like IKEA, for example, will rent you a truck to deliver the stuff.
That's a mind-boggling idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you stop and think of it. Yes, of course, we call them lorries. Not that really matters. And you'd have to have a special license and training to be allowed even to drive one of those. So the idea that you might rent one to bring your stuff home would have been a non-starter anyway, because you wouldn't have had I think my parents must have been in their 40s before they even considered getting a driver's license, let alone buying a car. That's an interesting point. Nowadays, if you haven't got one by the time you're 16, there's something wrong. I mean, a license, that is. You may or may not have a car, but certainly a driver's license.
Well, I'm finding that as a very different thing, too, because, I grew up in rural Alberta. So, like, our closest neighbor was a mile away, and we were 10 miles out of town. So, and I grew up with, like, farm kids. So they were learning to drive because they had to help out around the farm and stuff at, like, 10. So you got your learners at 14 and you got your license at 16, because if you wanted to go anywhere, that's what you do. And I found that when I moved into the city, that there was quite a few people my age that didn't even have their license because they had access to things like transit. But I'm going, don't you want, like, having a license opens up so many doors. And my daughter actually is going to be going and writing her learner's test tomorrow. And
oh, yes.
So we're all excited about that. But my nephew, who still lives in rural Alberta, and he's almost 17, he doesn't have his license. He's not interested in getting his license. And I'm going, I don't get it. So some are really into it, but I'm finding, talking to more of my clients and stuff like that, that the kids that are getting, especially the boys, the girls are more into getting their licenses that I'm finding than the boys are. And like I said, if you're in a city with transit, like, okay, yeah, you can deal with that, but it's a very different thing.
It's almost as though it's come full circle, because as you mentioned that, and I'm thinking, my two grandkids, what are they, 16 and 17, or about to be that age within the next 4 to 6 weeks. They don't seem to have any interest in getting a driver's license or whatever's involved in driving a car. I guess they don't see it as, perhaps if it ever was a status symbol, they certainly don't see it that way anymore. And they're, mind you, this may be something to do with my daughter's influence on them. They want to go somewhere, they figure it out for themselves, or go ride their bicycle. I mean, what's the bicycle for? So, so they have, they've come another path in the evolution of attitude to that kind of thing, back through your generation and back to my generation.
I'm thinking a lot of the values are changing. Like if you're talking with more of millennials and stuff, like our generation and your generation and my parents, which is in between you and I, were like, you're supposed to like get a house and you have the vehicle, and it's not so much status, but it's part of being an adult. But because the world has changed so much for the millennials and the younger ones, they know that they're not, like, it's highly unlikely that they're going to be able to purchase a house or a condo in their 20s. It's going to be their 30s before they have the money saved up. And vehicles are so much more expensive. And then you throw on the insurance and that, and they're going, do I want to make the financial commitment for that when I have all these other options? And there's so many people, like, they'll ride their bike. My husband will ride his bike in the summer quite a bit downtown to go to work, and they'll take transit, or they'll use mom and dad at different things like that, so they don't have the same attachment to it because it's not viewed the same way. Their values are looking very different. And in a lot of ways it makes sense, because if you're looking at even just insurance for a young person can be $300 a month, which is a lot of money.
Absolutely. I'm thinking as you say that I'm going to argue that, again, my generation and those who came perhaps a little bit later, this was to do with gaining freedom. Freedom from restrictions, freedom from scarcity, freedom of movement, freedom of independence, and to some extent privacy when we're talking about housing and that sort of thing. Nowadays, I think what I'm hearing you say is people of the current generation are seeing these things much more as a choice between actually giving up freedom and incurring obligations and restrictions, particularly financial ones, that they have a very different attitude towards deciding if they want to take on those obligations at this particular time, or whether they're better off without them.
So looking at kids today, like the younger generation, so our teenagers, your grandchildren and stuff, what are 3 lessons that you think that kids need to know in order to be happy and successful in the financial world when they hit adulthood? What are 3 things?
3 things. Happy and successful in the financial world. I would say, first of all, don't be too obsessed and concerned about money in and of itself. It's a means to an end, and that includes the idea that you should be making sure that you start saving from age 10 or whatever it might be for retirement. I don't think we're going to find that kids of this generation even get to understand what retirement is or what it means in the conventional sense. The idea that you work your butt off for a period of time so that eventually you can afford to not work your butt off anymore, I think is going to go completely by the board.
I think it already has in a lot of cases.
Think it already has. Okay. And so it's very much more a matter of what is it that gives you fulfillment in life, and what are you prepared to do in order to be able to get to that stage and not be in a place of scarcity? So that's one thing. The second one, and this comes from sooner or later, I think we're going to discover, and I kind of hope it's not in my lifetime, but you never know. Money actually doesn't mean very much And what's really important is very possibly going to be things that we would refer to as survival skills. What is it that you are going to be able to do that other people will place value on, that they in turn will trade stuff with you to your mutual satisfaction? Right now, that happens to be what we call money, but it doesn't have a whole lot of underpinning, and it's getting worse by the day. So do not put your entire trust in survival on having enough money, and I put that in air quotes, because I'm not at all sure that 20 years from now it'll have the same kind of meaning.
The world is changing very, very quickly and more drastically than a lot of people understand. Yes.
Yeah. As and when China finally gets pissed off with the United States and starts to do something with I believe it's something in excess of $4 trillion that they hold in reserve. I think it's getting close to the amount that the Federal Reserve is holding. They're going to want to do something with that, and the whole world's going to change once they make that decision that they're going to do that. And if you just want to sit and wait for that to happen and decide what to do after that, it could be too bad, so sad. So that's a couple of things. You want a third one, don't you?
What's the third one?
I would say, make sure that you don't lose sight of the value of really deep, meaningful relationships, and treasure and value and support those relationships at least as much as you're willing to focus on material wealth and material goods. It will be much more significant for you in the long run than dollars in a bank account.
Those are very, very good. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, John.
You're welcome. Been fun. Thank you.
It was. Have a great day.
You too.
Before we leave each other, I would ask all of you listening to please subscribe to and rate my podcast. A review would be most appreciated, and feedback is always welcome. Whether it be a comment, future topic suggestions, and or questions you or your kids would like to have answered in the Ask Tammy column on the financialfund.ca website. Please feel free to check me out on Facebook at Financial Foundation's Children's Books, on Twitter at Financial Fun, and Instagram at financial.fun.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Financial Fun Podcast. Join Tammy Johnston again next week. For more information, please visit financialfun.ca.